Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how Run For It, my front hinge four-wheel drive flipper, performed at ARC's July meet. I put Run For It into the A-League category to give it a bit of a test to see how well it could do against actual spinners. The last time we fought this, we put it into the B-League. Now, a couple of things to note before we go forwards. ARC had a very cut down July meet because we were about to do Robot Havoc, which is in a month from now, so we only ran ant weights for this meet, which means only an A-League meet video this week and a B-League video next week, and that's it for the July meet. There'll be more videos, of course, coming after Robot Havoc happens. Now, the other thing too is that Run For It, I put a brand new motor in to run the lifting weapon. This motor is somewhere in the order of 100, 120 to 1 rather than the 50 to 1 we were running last time, because I found that I wasn't quite as happy with the amount of lift force I was getting out of the 50 to 1, and it was too fast. Honestly, the 100 and something to 1 that I have in here at the moment is still too fast. This thing can throw the entire arm all the way to its end stop in like half a second, and I don't really need it to do that. So I might actually look at purchasing a new motor to go in here that is slower again, so I get even more push force, which could have been useful, but you'll see that in just a minute. Speaking of, let us get into the very first fight, and the first fight up is against Smasher, a hammer robot. So this fight proved my point a little bit about needing a higher gear ratio motor in Run For It, because there was a couple of those flips where it was my flipper versus his axe, and his axe is running on a servo with a smaller motor but a higher gear ratio. And yeah, he was, you know, those flips, it was a bit of a pushing match with weapons, and if I had a higher gear ratio motor, then I should be able to overpower that servo fairly easily, and like I said, I don't need the speed that I'm getting out of the flipping arm right now. The other issue that I saw in that fight was that he, every now and again, would only go up the wedge a little way, and when that happens, the servo or the flipper arm can't interact with him at all. Now, I either need to extend the range of the flipping arm, making it able to flip further out, or I need to lower the flipper arm down so that when I've got somebody on the wedge at least a little bit, I've still got some leverage on them. Those are all possible things that I might look at doing in a version 2, version 3 of this particular robot. You'll also notice that the arena was different this time around. That is because we are not using ARC's main arena, we're using the backup arena, because the main arena is being kitted out and getting itself ready for Robot Havoc 4, which is going to happen again in August sometime. So that was that fight. With the pit as it is in that arena, it's just open all the time. So I kind of decided early on that I was going to leave it alone unless I was taking heavy amounts of damage, or until I decided that I wanted to end a fight. And so in this case, I was running around using the flipper, testing it out, seeing if the new motor was working correctly and getting a bit of a feel for it. And then once I had a feel for it and managed to get him off balance, I decided that the pit was probably a good spot for him to be. So next up we have Brastoff, and this is the type of fight that I wanted when I put Run For It into this league. It is up against a very powerful vertical spinner. From my own experiences fighting with a vert against pushy wedges like what Run For It is, I had a very different idea of how this fight was going to go. Because when in the past when I've done that, I have just pushed against wedges and they've got underneath me and the weapon has been ineffective, and that was that. However, in this fight, I made a terminal error, or almost terminal error, and I flipped him early, which meant that his weapon was now upside down, it was now spinning down into the ground, and it was a lot higher up, which meant that anytime I wanted to contact him, especially if we went face to face, he was definitely getting weapon shots in, and more than likely he was either going to damage something or he was going to flip himself back over, which wasn't really ideal. I did try and get around the side of him and get around the back of him, but as anybody who's fought before knows, that is a very hard thing to do, because you need to kind of like circumvent around somebody and all they need to do is turn on the spot, which is fairly easy to do in most combat robot builds. So that was a thing. He did end up doing a fair amount of damage, and it doesn't really show all that much at the moment, but he managed to get some nice big hits on the top of the wedge, and in actual fact broke some of the ABS welds that I had down the sides, which I didn't think was possible. I was doing the ABS weld system because, as far as I was aware, an ABS weld was supposed to make a continuous line of plastic and not really have a weld so much as it was just plastic altogether with no real join. But it turns out that whatever I'm doing when I'm ABS welding, I am not doing it properly, because yeah, he broke the side ABS welder, which is now full of hot glue, and yeah, that was a little bit concerning. So with him doing some damage, I figured it was basically time to get him in the pit, and of course we did that and won the fight. So next up, we have a fight against Antimatter. Now this was going to be an interesting fight in my mind, because Antimatter is always really low to the ground, really well driven, and usually has prongs out the sides and the back, or at least the back, to make sure that he can't be stood up in a position. When he went into the arena, I could see that he had the prong out the back, but he didn't have the prongs out the side, so my entire fight plan for this fight was to try and get under the side of him and flip him over, but as with the Brastoff fight, doing that is easier said than done. So I got very lucky in this fight. There was a lot of luck involved, because every time the two robots came together, it was a 50-50 chance who went underneath who, because as I said before, he's a very low to the ground robot. Run For It isn't actually that low to the ground, but I do use acetate on the front wedge now to try and kind of force in underneath. And the thing with fighting against antimatter is because he runs quite low to the ground, but he runs a metal lip, which means every time he wins a fight, he's bending and warping the acetate, making him more likely to win the next exchange where we go in and push against each other. And yeah, it's a little bit interesting when that type of thing starts to happen. He was also doing very well at keeping face to face with me every time I charged in for an attack or tried to go around the side. And then I ended up getting him from the back up against the wall. Wasn't much I could do with that. The flipper wasn't quite enough. Like I said, if I ran a lower geared motor and had more torque, I probably could have flipped him onto his wedge up against the wall. That was kind of what I was going for, but I didn't have the actual power to get that done. So we ended up where we ended up, and he was kind of forced into the wall, and then I kind of got lucky and a little bit of a quick turn there, got him on the side and flipped him up underneath the camera, and that was it for him for this fight. So we won this one as well. Next up, we have a robot called Cheesy. Now, Cheesy is very similar to Chappie, which I fought with Run For It in the B League at the last meet. And I knew going into this one that it was going to be a hard fight. These are cheese style wedges with very large wheels. They can run either way. They have an invert switch on their controllers. And yeah, they're just very, very hard to do anything to with a flipper. So, yeah, that came to pass about, well, kind of what I expected it to come to pass at, especially the first half of that fight. The first half of that fight, a lot of me flipping them, a lot of them just flicking their invert switch and keeping on driving. And then I got them stuck in under the camera that I had positioned in the other corner of the arena. And of course I let them down from that. The camera is not an arena hazard, so that was definitely not fair to leave them there. So of course, wiggled them back out again, got them free. They did a very, very good job of staying away from the pit in any way, shape or form. I was trying to get them over there. It failed a couple of times. I tried to bait them over there by driving over that direction and kind of being there, and they just kind of backed up and left me alone. So that really only left me with the spinner. The spinner should be a motorized thing, but it had broken sometime between the last time it was used and now, which there was, quite a lot of gap in there. So it was basically just a kind of resistive spinner. And yeah, I managed to flip them into there and just kind of held them in there. There was a couple of times that I got them in there and they got back out again, but it's a tricky little arena hazard, that one, because there's a lot of places that you can be on top of it or kind of on top of it and drive away from, but then as they found, there is a couple of spots where if you get into the right spot, you get trapped and can't make it back out again. So we won this fight. The next fight up was against Blade Tip, and these fights were back to back. I literally backed into my starting square, left the robot alone, old opponent out, new opponent in, and we went straight away.
Yeah, no, you're all good. You get the benefit of the doubt.
So, yeah, back-to-back fights, and in one of those fights, I used the spinner to trap somebody else, and in the second fight, my opponent used the spinner to trap me, which, that's the way this goes sometimes, isn't it? I obviously was kind of forcing the fight into that corner. I'd had success with that strategy in the past. I'd got him in over the spinner a couple of times, and I was hoping that because of all of the blades and everything that he had around him, it would be fairly easy to kind of stack him in a spot around that spinner where he was going to get stuck. And instead I got stacked in a position that I couldn't get back out of, which is interesting because the four-wheel drive is a whole system and the whole robot is fairly low to the ground. I thought that there wasn't going to be too many spots around that spinner where I was going to get stuck, and unfortunately I got right into the exact position I needed to be in, so that none of my movements managed to make me get out of there. There was, looking back at the footage now, I think there's like 1 or 2 moments where if I'd gone forwards rather than backwards or backwards rather than forwards, I may have made it out of there, but there was no guarantee. And in the moment, while semi-panicking about the fact that I was getting stuck, I did not make the right calls, and I lost that fight. However, that was it. That was all of the A-League. We had fought absolutely everybody. There was no 2 bracket system or finals or anything. It was just straight down the line fights. So with our record of winning basically everything other than against Blade Tip, we ended up coming first in the A-League for this month's meet, which I am pretty happy about. We've come away fairly unscathed. Having said that, there wasn't too many big spinners in this league this month because a lot of people are kind of holding their big spinners back, waiting for Robot Havoc to happen. And yeah, there wasn't all that much in there, but I'm fairly happy with where we are. I've got some ideas for some upgrades for this. I might do a full version 2, I might not. I don't think I'm gonna fight this at Robot Havoc though. I've got other ideas in mind at the moment. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video.